development with regard to our security relationship over this past year relates to the decision of the United States Navy to continue its forward deployment in Southeast Asia. Then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, when he was here only a few months ago as part of the Shangri-La dialogue, announced our decision to station U.S. Navy littoral combat ships here in Singapore. And it wasn't just about stationing the LCS here. He added that we are going to look for other ways to enhance, or as he put it, operationalize the cooperation and relationship between the United States military and the Singapore military. And that would include repositioning of supplies to improve disaster responses, improving command and control capabilities that could be operated jointly, expanding training opportunities to help prepare our forces for the challenges both militaries face operating in the Pacific. Today, more Singaporean military personnel train in the United States than military personnel from any other country. And many people are aware that U.S. aircraft carriers often call on Singapore's port, but indeed we've had more than 100 U.S. Navy ship visits just this year in 2011. And each year, for the last few years, the number of U.S. Navy vessels visiting Singapore has increased dramatically. Now, as I've said, our military cooperation is broad-based. It's not just about ship visits or even this important decision to bring littoral combat ships to Singapore. One example could be the recent Pacific Endeavor exercise conducted here in Singapore just earlier this month. I was honored to address the 2011 participants of Pacific Endeavor at the closing ceremonies. Pacific Endeavor is an annual exercise intended to improve disaster responses. The exercise is jointly hosted by the United States and Singapore, and it brings together participants from over 40 Asia-Pacific countries, international humanitarian, NGOs, industry, and academia, providing a forum for all of these groups to work together to ensure that effective communications will be possible in any location when disaster strikes. And one of the issues facing those who respond to natural disasters is how to organize these many groups, dozens and sometimes in the hundreds, who show up on the scene with the best of intentions. Oftentimes, the first few hours or first few days that are most critical to bringing relief to those suffering from these natural disasters are lost because of the inability to coordinate their efforts. Well, Singapore and the United States for several years now have co-hosted Pacific Endeavor, and I'm proud to say that Pacific Endeavor, that exercise will again be in Singapore in 2012. I want to give another example. Our cooperation and afloat readiness and training exercise, better known as CARET, has entered its 17th year. And just last month, I observed from the deck of a Republic of Singapore Navy vessel in the South China Sea, the last day of that exercise. The U.S. Navy commanders I spoke to during the exercise described CARET with Singapore as the varsity level exercise. The U.S. Navy exercises with many of our friends here in the region, but they always say Singapore for last, and the exercises with the Singaporean Navy are considered the most sophisticated. This year's exercise saw something quite impressive, where Singapore shot down a simulated missile, which was a drone launched from a U.S. Navy vessel. CARET with Singapore also included, for the first time, complex submarine tracking events with subs from both countries. And for the first time ever, there was participation by Singapore's new S-70 helicopters. Well, why do I talk about these exercises between the U.S. Navy and Singapore as so central to our continued military-to-military cooperation? As you know, since my arrival in Singapore a little more than a year ago, maritime territorial disputes have caused some tension in the South China Sea. And while neither the United States nor Singapore are claimant states, we share the same interest in the peaceful resolution of these controversies. Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton clearly articulated the U.S. policy at the ARC last year when she said, "The United States has a national interest in freedom of navigation, open access to Asia's maritime commons, and respect for international law in the South China Sea." She added, "We oppose the use of threat or force against any claimant." I think it's particularly powerful to talk about the importance of international law and peacefully resolving these complaints here in this law school auditorium as part of the Lee Kuan Yew School. And I think it's at the very heart of what the United States is trying to do here with its joint exercises throughout the region. The message is clear. The United States will stand with her friends on any issues and tensions arising in the South China Sea. The U.S. and Singapore continue to work together as constructive forces in promoting international law to diffuse the recent tensions and to move towards a fair and open process for dispute resolution. Now, our security relationship is not limited to the military. An important part of this relationship, which by its very nature won't receive as much attention, is in the area of law enforcement cooperation. We are close partners in combating terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, upholding international law, and promoting a law-based society. An example I like to point to since my arrival here would be Singapore's participation in the Nuclear Security Summit, which President Obama hosted in April of last year in New York City. It's important to note that Singapore not only enhanced its non-proliferation credentials when Prime Minister Lee announced at the summit Singapore's participation, but Singapore took it a step further and has played a key role in adding to the momentum of that seminal event by hosting in July an intersessional forum on peaceful uses of nuclear energy and technology. Additionally,